The exhaustion defining modern relationships is rarely the result of a grand emotional tragedy. Look closely at the clinical presentation, and you see something far more mechanical, a profound systemic depletion of energy. We tend to romanticize this exhaustion as a sign of deep affection or moral sacrifice. In reality, what we call self-erasure is an autonomic processing error within the human nervous system. To understand this error, we have to look at interoception. This animated schematic shows the brain's internal monitoring system. It reads sensory pathways feeding inward, tracking physiological baselines like heart rate and respiration to maintain a stable autonomic core. Compare that to exteroception, the constant scanning of the external environment. Notice how, as the system pings outward to monitor a partner's behavioral cues, the core's energy gradient visibly depletes with every pulse.
Cultural conditioning toward chasing happiness forces the nervous system to over-index on exteroception, essentially outsourcing emotional regulation to the unpredictable behavior of another person. Continuously suppressing interoceptive signals to prioritize a partner's shifting moods denies the brain the data it needs to stabilize the body. Physiological dysregulation is the guaranteed result. Relationship fatigue is the inevitable, mathematical outcome of a biological system prioritizing an unpredictable external target over its own life support metrics. This specific vulnerability to external targets doesn't develop in our adult romantic lives. Its architecture is mapped during early infancy. The baseline metric for understanding this neurosocial wiring comes from the work of psychologist Mary Ainsworth. This photographic record from Ainsworth's Strange Situation Task observes the vectors of interaction between a caregiver, a stranger, and an infant, capturing the exact mechanics of early environmental scanning and separation anxiety. That early environment physically wires the structures of the brain's dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin networks. These essential neurochemicals become conditioned to release only in response to specific external auditory and visual cues from the primary caregiver. This animated diagram maps the physiological response of an infant seeking a caregiver directly onto the nervous system of an adult waiting for a text message. The neurochemical spikes are identical and synchronized. We are running obsolete childhood software. Individuals who experience dysregulated early bonds enter adult partnerships with a specific neurological deficit. They process their partner's emotional state as a critical biological survival metric. The debilitating anxiety of a modern relationship occurs when an adult nervous system falsely interprets a lack of external validation as an immediate physical threat to its own survival. If these reactions are purely mechanical, we have to ask why the physiological symptoms of heartbreak persist for months or years after the partner is removed. The answer lies in the hard limits of emotional chemistry, specifically defined by neuroanatomist Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. This biaxial graph tracks the actual biological lifespan of an emotion. Time is on the x-axis, neurochemical concentration on the y. A chemical cascade, the flushing of stress peptides through the bloodstream, peaks and decays completely back to a zero baseline in exactly 90 seconds. Distress or grief lasting beyond this 90-second cascade requires an artificial manufacturing process to sustain itself. Look at what happens to the graph when we introduce the cognitive process of rumination. That jagged, high-frequency wave extending infinitely along the x-axis is an artificial subroutine. By willfully revisiting triggering memories, the subject feeds the psychological wound rather than letting it close. Every loop of that rumination manually triggers the 90-second chemical cascade all over again. This creates an endless feedback loop that leads directly to chronic dysregulation of the vagus nerve. Prolonged heartbreak serves as a self-inflicted biochemical injury, a state of chronic distress that persists only through the repeated, manual re-triggering of the 90-second window. This chronic internal dysregulation eventually spills outward, often manifesting in daily, physical interpersonal behaviors during moments of conflict. We see this clearly in the mechanics of the preemptive apology. When a relationship becomes unstable, the anxious partner will often apologize for an offense they did not commit. A preemptive apology serves a distinct mechanical function, separate from empathy or de-escalation. This abstract node network illustrates the behavior. The preemptive apology is an aggressive, maladaptive attempt to force predictability onto an erratic exteroceptive target. The central node frantically alters its own shape and frequency to match the unpredictable neighbor.
watch the primary node's core luminance. With every forced shape alteration, the system suffers severe energy depletion and structural degradation. The subject is willingly dismantling their own psychological architecture. They accept complete destabilization just to maintain an unsustainable illusion of control. Attempting to govern another individual's neurochemistry at the expense of your own homeostasis guarantees complete and total self-erasure. Diagnosing this exteroceptive pathology is only the first step. The priority must shift to clinical intervention, rebuilding a neural architecture that can actually sustain itself. The framework for this intervention relies on the concept of antifragility, developed by risk analyst Nassim Taleb. This flowchart maps Taleb's triad directly onto human neural pathways. It categorizes systems as fragile, which shatter under stress, robust, which resist stress without changing, and antifragile, which actually require volatility to adapt and expand. Applying this to human attachment treats the failure of a partnership as a specific data input, signaling the need for internal cognitive restructuring. The first intervention protocol is third-person self-talk. This acts as an immediate mechanical circuit breaker for emotional cascades. Referring to yourself in the third person forces the brain out of the reactive limbic rumination loop. This linguistic shift re-engages the rational processing centers of the prefrontal cortex. The next protocol is mental contrasting. Systematically mapping future behaviors against anticipated interpersonal obstacles removes the element of surprise from any relationship dynamic. As we apply these protocols, the unstable node network breaks apart. The primary node stops attempting to match external frequencies entirely. Instead, it forms a hardened, self-sustaining internal feedback loop. The system state has achieved anti-fragility. Abandoning the chase for happiness provides the necessary baseline for actual physiological and psychological functionality. Relationship volatility is the exact mechanical friction required to build an anti-fragile mind. True systemic stability is achieved only when the human machine abandons the unpredictable variables of modern love and strictly prioritizes its own internal algorithms.